So we are on Daf Kuf Mem Gimel 143b, and we're beginning the sugya of what we know as schita, which is squeezing out juice from fruit. And this is a tolda. This is a secondary melacha of dash. The way dash is threshing. The way a stalk with wheat berries and grains grows is that there's a husk and the berries inside, and you need to squeeze that in order to get the food, the berry, out of the husk. And that is a extraction of something that is really trapped within. And a secondary level that is squeezing a grape to get the juice, which is encapsulated in the fruit. So anytime you're extracting the desired inside from an encased outside, could be a form of schita and dash and prohibited. Now we're going to see that there's a distinction made between fruits that are generally squeezed for the fruit, for the juice that's in there, fruits that are sometimes but usually not squeezed for its fruit, for its juice, and where the juice is only used as a part of food. So if you think of let's say melons are usually not squeezed for their juice, and therefore the juice would not necessarily count as schita, even though when you cut it and you handle it, you do get juice. It's tomato. You cut a tomato, you're always going to get some juice, liquid, but that's not the way you make tomato juice. Tomato juice is really pureed, and you take the pulp of the fruit. You're not squeezing out the water that's encapsulated, so that would not necessarily be schita on Shabbos. We'll also see a Torah prohibition level, rabbinic prohibition level, because it is sometimes used but not generally, and when it is permissible to be done on Shabbos. So we're about a third of the way down. Ein suchten as aperos. The Mishnah says you may not squeeze fruit. So in the first opinion, it says to extract the juice, and if the juices came out on their own, they would still be prohibited because maybe you will come to extract it. And Rabbi Yehuda makes a distinction, whether it's food or whether it's made for drink. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Shmuel, Moedahei Rabbi Yehuda. So Shmuel said that Rabbi Yehuda would agree and prohibit juices that came out on its own, l'chachamim, to like the chachamim who prohibited, by olives and by grapes, because there primarily it is for it is for the fruits. Most people or most grapes are made for the wine and juice that comes out of it. And similarly with olives, the majority are made for the juices, the oils that come out of it. And so if some of it comes out on its own, you may not, Rabbi Yehuda will agree that you may not use it on Shabbos. Now, just the definition of the majority. Do we go by the majority of grapes in the world, the majority of grapes in your region, or do we go by the majority of uses? So individual people, how many people will use the grapes for the juices versus how many people will use the grapes for eating? That last barometer, if you would, is changed for sure nowadays, because back when it is understand that most people make some wine on their own, and so the majority of grapes that individual people had would have been not for eating because it was expensive, and most people could not afford to eat grapes just for the sake of grapes. The majority of grapes went into wine, but each individual. I think that today the majority of grapes may still go into wine and juice, but not necessarily on an individual basis.
I mean, there are different varieties, as you know. There are different varieties.
Yeah, there is such a thing as a different variety. How doesn't necessarily distinguish that make that distinction. It says as grapes, right? A particular varietal grape is edible, and the others for juice. But the concept is grapes entirely.
Just saying, in today's world, we don't sit down to a bowl of Pinot Noir grapes. That's those grapes are used for wine, but they're not used. People don't put them on the table. You can't go to Safeway and buy Pinot Noir grapes. They don't sell them. That's not.
You couldn't afford it.
But also, I was thinking about oranges for orange juice. That's a whole different.
Oranges is really, that's where this debate really comes in. The vast majority of oranges are for juicing, the vast majority. But most people don't juice on their own. A few do, on occasion, but the vast majority of individual people will buy oranges for eating. In any case, so Shmuel says when the majority use it for juice, so whether individual people, the majority of produce is used for juice, even Rabbi Yehuda will agree to the Chachamim that if it oozes on its own, you should not be allowed to use it on Shabbos. My timer, what's the reason? Since the vast majority go for juicing, so it's made for squeezing. So therefore we assume he intended for the juice, and once it comes out as juice, that is a part of the juicing process. This last line here is, I think, the defining reason why it should not count by the majority of the produce, but rather by the majority of people. Because since we're looking for what his intent would be, we need it to be that the majority of individual people would buy their fruit for juicing or intend for it to be juiced. And therefore, we can assume that his intent is for the juice that comes out of it. Because since we're looking for his intent, we would have to go by the majority of individual people. And as such, we would assume today that somebody bought oranges or even grapes in their home. They don't intend for the juice of it. They intend for the fruit, for eating it as a fruit and as a food. And therefore, if it oozes on its own, you can still, it still would not prohibit that juice that ran out. However, Rav said, Yehuda disagrees even in olives and in grapes, and he says that no, that there's no prohibition of the juices that came out on their own, even in such products that generally people squeeze. Rabbi Yochanan says Allah is like Rabbi Yehuda in regards to other fruit, not olives, not grapes, because those are the majority. Majority do squeeze. So rather in produce that most don't squeeze, or really are not made for squeezing, not made for juicing. He says that and by olives and grapes, Allah is like the Chachamim. Amar Rava, so Rava said, Amar Ba'aba, Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Moida Rabbi Yehuda Chachamim b'zeisav ha'anavim. Shmuel says that Rabbi Yehuda agrees to Chachamim by olives. In other words, the juice that came out is even on its own is prohibited. And the Chachamim agreed to Rabbi Yehuda in other produce. They don't even disagree about this. So what is the machlokas? Well, go seek in a brisa, you'll find it. It says it's logical to say that it's in berries and pomegranates. So this is produce that the majority is made for food. Most people will eat berries. Most people will eat the pomegranates. However, there are enough people that do juice them. And so it is common, but not majority to be juiced. And therefore, it's a rabbinic prohibition, even though it's not primarily for the encapsulated juice in there. Primarily, it's food, and so therefore it would not be a Torah prohibition of of squeezing, of dash, of extracting, which would be, everybody would agree, olives and grapes are, because primarily that's what people do with it. Berries and pomegranates are a lower level. Nevertheless, the Rabbanan prohibit the juices that come out on Shabbos on account of that is somewhat somewhat for its juices, according in some cases. Some people will do so, and therefore the Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim prohibited, and Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, no, it's permissible if it came out on its own. We're not concerned that you're going to squeeze it by yourself. The Tanya, as we learn, olives and grapes that the juices came out on their own, whether oils or wine. Regardless of whether you decided when you harvested whether you wanted it for food or for drink, aser. Nevertheless, it's going to be prohibited. These juices that came out on Shabbos are going to be prohibited. Tutim, berries, that the juices came out, the waters came out. Or the wine that came out of pomegranates, and the juice of pomegranates is more sour and tart, and so therefore it's called wine. But either way, the juices that came out of berries and pomegranates, there it will make the Brisa makes a distinction. If you brought it in and you intended it for it as food, mutter, then the juices that came out are permissible because you don't intend to squeeze it, and you didn't want the juices, and therefore it's going to be permissible to have lamashkin. However, if you intended for juice, then or listam, or if you did not intend anything, that juices that came out are going to be prohibited. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim say no such distinction. Since these are berries and pomegranates, which some people do juice, so regardless of what your intent was when you got it, since it is juiceable, it'll be prohibited. The juices that come out are prohibited because we're afraid that now that some juices came out, you're going to continue juicing the rest of them. So now we're going to challenge the middle case. Rabbi Yehuda said, if you intended for food, then the juices are fine because you're not going to squeeze it because you intended for food. If you intended for juice, so then for sure the juices are prohibited because you're going to continue juicing on Shabbos, we're afraid. But if you didn't have a specific intent, so then it's going to be prohibited, meaning that we assume since some people juice them and some people don't, and you didn't have a specific intent, you're included in the juicing. Is that really the case? So Yehuda holds that when something is not specifically defined with intent, that it's going to be prohibited. What not? And for this, we're going to go back and learn. Remember the halacha of produce is only susceptible to tumah if the produce became wet with shiva mashkin. It became wet with one of the 7 halachic liquids. And so the other things can be in a liquid state, but they don't count as the primary liquids that count as sort of like water. And they have to be an intentional liquid, an intentional juice. And if not, it doesn't count. So we learned in the Mishnah what type of milk would count. Chalava isha, breast milk. Matama l'ratzon shaloi l'ratzon. That would be count as a juice, and if it fell on, if it came intentionally on produce, it would count as making it susceptible to tumah, regardless of whether whether the milk was expressed from the woman intentionally or unintentionally. Chalav behema, however, animal milk, goat's milk, cow's milk, etc., that would only count as a proper liquid if it was expressed from the animal intentionally. But if it just dripped out, it would not count. Rabbi Kiva said it's quite the contrary, a logical conclusion the other way. breast milk, which is really only food in regards to a child. Nevertheless, it counts as a liquid, regardless of whether it was expressed intentionally or unintentionally. Animal milk, which is food for or drink for both adult and child. Shouldn't account as a liquid regardless of whether it's expressed intentionally or unintentionally. Well, by a human, a blood from a wound also counts as blood and a liquid, and therefore the milk that comes from the human also, when unintentionally, a wound is unintentional, and the blood counts as a liquid. So too, the milk expressed unintentionally that is also going to count as a liquid. Should you compare animal milk to that? When the milk was expressed unintentionally, because the wound blood, meaning unintentional bleeding of an animal, there the blood does not count as a liquid that can make produce tummy. So the distinction is, by a human, both intentional and unintentional blood, meaning whether it's from a wound that's intentionally made for surgery or whatever, bloodletting, or it's unintentionally, such somebody hurt themselves and they have an injury, the blood, regardless, is going to count as a liquid, and if it fell on produce, will make it susceptible to tumah. And therefore, the milk expressed intentionally or unintentionally would count as susceptible to tumah. Not so by an animal; it's only intentional blood and not a wound that counts as liquid and will make something tummy. So too with milk. So, I'm strict in regards to blood, even if in milk, even though it was expressed unintentionally, more than blood, because if somebody milks an animal not for the milk, but to help release and relieve the pressure on the udders, because it's for the animal's benefit. That counts as an actual intentional expression, even though they don't want the milk, they only want to help the animal not feel uncomfortable. However, if somebody does a bloodletting of an animal's ill, and the vet comes and says, we need to cut this animal and let some blood out, and that'll help them heal. Tahor, that blood is permissive, is not going to make, it doesn't count as liquid, it will not make produce tummy. So therefore, we see that milk is stricter than blood, so you can't compare it to the blood. They said, well, actually, we can prove it from olives and grapes where the juices come out on their own. So you harvest your grapes, you put them into a bin, and obviously the pressure of the grapes above are going to squeeze some of the grapes at the bottom, and there's going to be juices at the bottom of your bin. And we say that if you intended for the juices to come out, so then those juices count as intentional and will count as a liquid and could make the produce susceptible to tumah. And yet, if it comes out unintentionally, it will not make the juice, the produce susceptible to tumah. So that simple reading is my lav l'ratzon danichale. What does it mean? Well, he did so intentionally. He purposefully squeezed the grapes at the bottom of the bin. No, that's not the case. He's just harvesting and putting the grapes in. So what it means is that he's happy about the juices coming out because that's what he intends to do anyhow. So he doesn't mind that the juices come out. And when are we talking about that the juices came out unintentionally, or that he didn't want it? Bistama, where he didn't have a particular intent for the juices, and yet it came out and there. And so we see that even unintentional, as long as it wasn't specific intent for the juice, that it'll not count as a liquid. And now he continues the argument and says, olives and grapes, which are made for the juices that are in there, yet shalelu ratzon v'lo klum. If it wasn't intentionally that he wanted the juices, it doesn't count. Berries and pomegranates, which, although some people do squeeze them, the majority of people don't, and therefore it's not specifically made for juices. When you say for sure that if it's unintentional, he didn't specifically intend for the juices, that it doesn't count. And therefore, how can you say that Yehuda holds that when you squeeze, when juices run out of berries, without it, and you did not have a specific intent that that they should be juice berries or juice pomegranates? You just brought them in. You didn't know whether you were going to eat them. You didn't intentionally think that you were going to juice them. And yet you want to say that the juices come out of that are going to be prohibited. But in our case over here, we said l'ratzon, that you intended, seemingly that means that you actually wanted the juices there. And meaning, if you did not specifically want it, if it's stomach, if you had no specific intent, that it would not count as juice that can make produce susceptible to tumah. And therefore, here too, in regards to Shabbos, this should not be prohibited. You should not be prohibited in drinking that juice, because we're not afraid you're going to continue squeezing it. After all, it doesn't count as juice. So he says, "Lo, l'ratza mistama," when it means that you wanted it, meaning you didn't intentionally not want it. Shalol l'ratza l'gali adaite d'amar le'nichal. Now, earlier when we said that the juice came out of the grapes intentionally, or as you wanted, versus if you didn't want it. And if you didn't want it, it doesn't make produce susceptible to tumah. And if you did want it, it counts as juice, and it does make the produce susceptible to tumah. It's not based on whether you wanted it or you didn't have a specific intent. Because if you didn't have a specific intent, it would count as juice. And when he said that he didn't want it, means he specifically stated, or at least let it be known. Rashi says that he specifically stated it. Others say that he just somehow let it be known that he does not want the juice of these grapes. These are grapes for eating. Or perhaps, or perhaps in olives and grapes, the reason it would not count as juice is in baskets. We're talking about wicker baskets, where there the juice is going to drip out, and it's going to be lost anyhow. And therefore, if he doesn't have specific intent that he wants the juice, it will not count as juices. Pomegranates and berries are going to be in a basket that is solid, and therefore the juices could be maintained. But at least the case of the harvest over here, and the question of the juices dripping out, and we said that if there's no intent, it would count as it would not count as a liquid. That's only in juices that are going to be lost anyhow, and he has no intent to maintain it. So we find that Rabbi Yehuda does agree to the Chachamim and say that olives and grapes that got juiced on their own, so juices ran out of them, those would be prohibited on Shabbos. And we find the Rabbanan the Rabbi Yehuda b'shar peres, that the Rabbanan agree to the Chachamim, to Rabbi Yehuda, and permit other other produce that oozed on Shabbos, that the juices sort of came out on their own, and that you're allowed to take that. Minola. The Tani we learned. And here we turn to Kuf Mem Dalet Amud Aleph. The Tani we learned, Amud Beis, 144b. The Tani we learned, Sechatin bepagoyin uberishin ubuzradin. You're allowed to squeeze, Rashi says prunes, which I assume means plums, in order to get the juice out of plums, and parishin, I think, is quince, and uzradin is a type of bean. I'm not sure what that is. If anybody has a translation, feel free to call it out.
Apple bar, maybe crab apples.
I don't know.
Yeah, stands as
this is
translates as crab apples.
and this is sorb apples, whatever that is. I think crab apples is a good one.
Okay. Food that we don't necessarily like to eat. It's a fruit that's pretty bitter and sour. In any case, these are not really made for their juices. And therefore, you can squeeze them on Shabbos because that's not what it's made for. But you may not do so with pomegranates. And in the house of Menashe, it was common for them to make pomegranate juice, and so that was that proves that it was a juiceable or made for juice fruit, and therefore it's prohibited on Shabbos. So Gemara says, okay, great. So we did find such a statement that other produce are permissible, but how do you know this is the opinion of the Rabbanan? Maybe this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who was lenient in any case. But to have an Amar Rabbi Yehuda, so what? Even if it's Rabbi Yehuda, we find a new leniency here that we didn't see before. Because up until now, we were discussing juices that came out on their own on Shabbos of a fruit. That's not made for juice. It's made for eating. You can drink the juice because we're not afraid that you're going to juice the rest, because after all, the juice in any case is, the fruit in any case is not made for juicing. And so we're not afraid that you're going to juice it. The juice that ran out on its own is going to be a drink to you, but we're not afraid you're going to squeeze the rest, which would be prohibited, is the understanding we had up until now. And now we have a brisa that says you're allowed to go ahead and take your plum and squeeze it to give yourself some juice. Those that came out on their own, you can squeeze, no problem. Whereas a mishamisle, Ella, so what are you going to say? That since they are not made for juicing, so that's not, you're not extracting juice, you're just separating food from food. You have food and you have another food, and you're just separating one food from the other, and that's not going to be prohibited because that is the means of eating two foods. The definition of schita is going to be, this is Rashi's interpretation, the definition of schita is going to be just like borer, selecting the bad from the good or good from the bad. Here, where they're both food and you're just squeezing one food, the juice, from another food, the food, the pulp, that's going to be permissible, and you can go ahead and do that on Shabbos. So this is the proof that this is a distinct halacha from the previous discussion. And our Mishnah was talking about juices that became unintentionally squeezed out of or oozed out of the fruits that may sometimes be juiced. That's where we had this machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. But in regards to, and whether you're allowed to consume that juice on Shabbos, but there was no discussion in regards to actually juicing something on Shabbos. And since we have a brisa that says you're allowed to juice these fruits that are never meant for juicing, because as Rashi explains, it's actually not a separating process of food from non-food, but rather it is they're both food. Therefore, the Chachamim would agree to that as well, because we never find that they disagree in regards to something like this. And so we said that we see that pomegranates are a juiceable product, because we see in Menashe's house they would do so. The halacha is like this family. Amalei Rav Rav Nachman Menashe Bar Menachem Tanahu. He taught something. Was there a disagreement that he stated something that made a difference? We were just saying that an anecdotal proof that people juice pomegranates. That's all the house of Menashe was. You can't tell me the halachas like them. They were juicing it on a Tuesday, and we were just using that as anecdotal proof that pomegranates are a juiceable fruit. And if you tell me, you know what I meant was that the brisa that says that pomegranates may not be juiced on account of the anecdotal proof of Beis Menashe, and just because he follows the household of Menashe and says that look, they juice it, and so therefore it counts as a juiceable fruit. Therefore, the halacha is like it. Menashe bar Menachem havaruba de alma. Is that household the majority of the world? Shouldn't we follow the majority of people? And the majority of people, they buy or bring home pomegranates from the field or from the market for the purpose of eating them. So what? That you found a family that they make juice out of it. Wonderful. And I'm sure it tastes good, but it has nothing to do with the halachas of Shabbos. We would follow the majority. Why are they the majority of the world? Yep, they are. In other words, even though that they're not the majority of the world, we do follow. We follow this. The Tanan, as we learned, a Makayim Kutzim Beker. The halacha of a vineyard is that you cannot plant other products there, and it'll be mixed seed if you plant it within a vineyard. If something became planted there, whether intentionally, unintentionally, whatever it is, and you keep it there, then it could prohibit the produce from that vineyard. So Hamakayim kotzim bekerem, somebody who keeps thorns in a vineyard, and these thorns produce a fruit. So think blackberries. Rashi says carduns here. I don't know what it is, or maybe one of your translations translate. In any case, somebody who allows these to remain in a vineyard. So Rabbi Lezer says that it prohibits the produce because it's a mixed seed. Doesn't make a difference that he kept it, because nobody else does. So it's only going to be considered a prohibited mixed seed if the majority of people would keep it there. But if most people don't keep such a vine, say blackberries, in the vineyard, most people would remove it. The fact that this person kept it there, that's a non-product. That counts as waste, as weeds over there, because it's not really something that people would want to keep, the majority. V'amar Rabbi Chanina, my time Rabbi Lezer. And Rabbi Chanina says, what's the reasoning of Rabbi Lezer that he says that it would be prohibited? Shekem baravi mekaymin koitzi sadis legmalei. The reason is because in Pan Arabia, there they would keep these thorns in the vineyards so that they can feed their camels. So Gemara says, "Mi the area da Arabia asa." It's great. I'm sure that in a place like Arabia where they keep it, it would be prohibited. But what relevance would it have to us over here? Over here, the majority of people don't. And but it's a koladim. The one person who keeps it, his intent is nullified to the majority of people. This is not. It's a weed. So rather, the reason is like Rav Chisda. The Amar Rav Chisda said, "Tardin shasachta manasam b'mikvah, hosel nesamikvah." We're switching over to the halachas of mikvah in order to prove this concept. The halacha of a mikvah is that it must have 40 sa of water that is gathered, natural rainwater that has not been drawn in a bucket. It has to have run in there by itself. It could not have been in a vessel. That's one psul and a invalidating factor of a mikveh. If you have 3 lug, which is not that much, 3 lug of water within the first 40 seah, which are drawn water as opposed to natural rainwater having run there on its own. Another form of psul in a mikveh, invalidation of the mikveh, and this could be even if the mikveh is already full of 40 seah, so you already have a full mikveh measure. If another liquid comes in there, that changes the color or changes the look of the mikveh and turns it into another look. So somebody squeezed tardin, which I'm not sure if it's a green leafy vegetable or something else.
What was beet greens?
Sorry?
It was beet greens.
Yes, it could be beets themselves. It could be beet greens. I'm not sure if it's a green or the fruit or the root vegetable itself. So now, if these were squeezed and then put into the mikveh, so this juice changed the color of the mikveh. It'll invalidate the mikveh. Now, he says, but it's not made for the juices. And so therefore the juice should not count as a liquid, and when it falls into the mikveh, it should count as a non-liquid that changed the color of the mikveh, which would be fine, sort of like an algae. That wouldn't invalidate the mikveh because that's a part of the waters. So how are you going to explain the halach over there that Rav Chisda says in regards to the juices? It says, you're right. I don't want it for the juices, but nevertheless, since I did juice it, my intention makes it an important product. It makes it a product of juice. So to here, so to over here, since I intended, I squeezed it because I wanted, even if I didn't want the juices, I squeezed it because I wanted to sweeten the crab apple. I wanted to make the crab apple a better product, and by squeezing it, I felt that made it better. Nevertheless, my intention is going to define it as properly a juice. And so that's the reason that it would count, not on account. But we see from the house of Menashe that where they intended, it's going to count, and so too that's what Rav Chisda is going to say in regards to the halach of Rabbi Eliezer, and the same halach over here. Rabbi Eliezer says in regards to the vineyard, since I intend to keep this thorn bush here because I do want its product, so therefore achshavinu, I made it of significance. My mind makes it of significance, and therefore it counts for me. So too in this product here, if I do something that is of significant, my intention makes it significant, that would count. Rav Papa says it's a different reason, not on account of that it actually counts as a juice and prohibits it. It counts as a juice and therefore it changes the mikveh, but rather because you can never make a mikveh out of it. And anything that you can't make a mikveh of, such as what you're allowed to make a mikveh is water and snow and ice, etc. That counts as a mikveh. It's a liquid. It's a water liquid. However, anything that you cannot make a mikveh from, if it such as fruit juices or vegetable juices, you can't make a mikveh from that. and that comes into the mikvah and changes the color of the mikvah, that would make it invalid. Not because you consider it a juice and therefore it counts as a liquid, but it's simply not the correct liquid for a mikvah. A mikvah needs to be a water-based, whether it's ice, snow, or water. That's the way to that. Those are valid forms of making a mikvah, and therefore, if your water was the wrong color, it would not invalidate the mikvah. But if you had something that you cannot make a mikvah from the start, and then it did fall in and changed the mikvah color, that would make it invalid. So and anything that cannot be the beginning source of a mikvah, that would prohibit the mikvah when you changes the color. Tanan Hasan. So we're going to see a Mishnah about this and learn this. We'll quickly finish with this halacha of wine or other changes of the mikvah color. Wine or wine vinegar that falls in to the mikvah, umahal, or other juices, mashine marav pasal, and it changed its and it changed the color of the mikvah pasal. It's going to make it invalid. Mantona the moil the mashkahu, and whose opinion is this that indeed that this counts as a mashka, it counts as that the juices count as a proper liquid, and therefore it invalidates the mikvah. Because again, we thought at the beginning that something has to count as a valid liquid in order for it to prohibit the mikvah in the change of color, because otherwise it'll be like algae in the water, and that's not a problem. So in order, the Gemara thinks, whose opinion is this? And the Gemara asks, whose opinion is this that just juices would also count as an invalidation of a mikvah on account of that it counts as a liquid? This is the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. The Tanya, Rabbi Yaakov says, Moel arei kamashke. Moel counts as a liquid, and therefore can, if it falls on produce, it can make it susceptible to tumah, and if it falls into a mikvah, it can invalidate it if it changes the color of the mikvah. So why do we say that that just these juices that come out of olives at the beginning of the harvest, even though that it's not ready for a press, that it counts as, it does not count as a liquid? After all, it shouldn't be no different than juices that come out of another fruit. That's specifically by olives. I actually don't want it there. It's not good for the fruit. However, Rabbi Shimon Amemoel Eina Kamashka, he says that these juices that come out actually don't count as a liquid, and therefore, if it falls on produce, it would not make it susceptible to tumah. So why then is after juices that come out after you've completed the olive press, or before you begin pressing, and some of it comes out? So why those juices that come, not the oil, but the juices that come out, why is that going to be count as enough of a liquid to make produce susceptible to tumah if it falls on it? Not because the juice itself counts as a liquid, but you can't have that liquid that juice that comes out of an olive without some oils in there, and the oils you want. So even though it's going to be hard for you to separate that, and you may toss it, but Rabbi Shimon says that's going to count as juice and make your produce susceptible to tumah on account of that. It can't be that there's no oil in there. So my benayu. So what's this? What is the basis of this machlokas? Whether the juice that comes out at first is going to make produce susceptible to tumah or not, and whether you want that or not. So what's the distinction? The asabasa itzasi, that it's after the fermentation begins, and after that fermentation begins, and they press against each other. That when that comes out. And that counts as, does that count enough to make it a valid juice or not? All right, let's stop here. We're going to see tomorrow Rava, which says that it's a machlokes of whether you can make a mikvah out of it or not. We'll review this last halacha and begin again tomorrow with Rava's response.